all of the Blue Rockers online, and of course, welcome to all of our clients and members of the community who've joined us today. For those of you who are new to BlueRock, we're an entrepreneurial advisory firm. So we've got two parts of our business. We've got a professional services part where we have over 200 people in different disciplines, including accounting, wealth management, law, digital, finance. And we've got an investment part of our business where we invest, we co-own, we co-locate in various businesses. We invest in businesses in property, in hospitality, technology, and a number of different things. And so really get support the entrepreneurs. So we're really excited to celebrate some of the contributions of amazing women in our community today. So in December, I was fortunate to present the Blue Rocker of the Year Awards. This is an award voted on by our board, our executive leadership team, and the past winners. And interestingly, during the middle of COVID and all the lockdowns, the 7 finalists were all women. They represented amazing contributions in different parts of the business. So Kate Fassini, Kate Masterson, Jo McCartney, Jo Stanlake, Kaya, Lisa Marie, and Jackie all were the finalists in that award. At the same time, we announced 2 of our senior appointments being women as new directors in Jo and Mel, and both of those women have been in the business for a long time, and they've been contributed in many ways. We actively support the International Women's Day theme of choose to challenge. And it's important for us to ensure that women have a seat at the table and are actively involved in all key business decisions. And so I'd like to recognise 4 important women at BlueRock in our community. So Ella Morse is head of investments at our investment business, and she does an amazing job. Lisa Marshall's the chair of our executive leadership team. Jo Stanlake, our Blue Rocker of the Year, for all the amazing work she did, is the director in charge of our communications and marketing. And Sabrina Del Borello is head of people and culture, and she's working side by side with our team. So thank you to all of them. But today we're moving outside of the Blue Rock offices, and we have Jo Burston with us today. So welcome, Jo.
Thank you.
So Jo is an amazing entrepreneur herself. She's worked in partnership with the Prime Minister, with Cabinet, with the Office for Women, and also with global brands such as Microsoft, EY, PwC, Xero, and Google. Jo's launched 6 amazing businesses, and she's passionate about the idea that you can't be what you can't see. Through her globally recognised social impact business, Rare Birds, Jo supports and inspires and educates women in business and to help them create opportunities for everyone in entrepreneurship and leadership. So it's great that we get to hear from Jo today, and I'll hand it over to her in a sec. But before I do, today is also very exciting, is that we get to have an award today, or a prize, where one lucky attendee gets to receive a Rare Birds mentorship program for women in business. So after the session today, we'll send a link around with expressions of interest. So if you are interested, you have 2 weeks to fill in the application form and the questionnaire, and we'll judge the winner based on those questionnaires. So thank you, Jo. Welcome, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Bruce, and thank you to the team at BlueRock, who's been really amazing pulling this event together this morning. Now, the topic I'm going to talk about is one that I'm obviously very passionate about, and I'm just going to, and also I'm going to, there's some big hits in here as well. So be prepared for me to say things that might get you thinking a little bit, which is always the aim of my game. I'll just get my notes up here. So hello to everyone, and thank you for inviting me to join you in celebrating International Women's Day for 2021. And I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands across Australia from where we're all dialing in or tuning in from today, and pay my respects to Indigenous elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to talk a little bit about what International Women's Day means for me. It's always a time for great reflection. It's a time to look at the status of women in Australia and where they're at with their quest for equality. What I see particularly recently is that women are getting bolder, they're getting louder, and they're speaking out and they're pushing back a little bit more. And there's still a lot of change that needs to occur. And hopefully today, I'm going to inspire you to make some of that change and take some actions and further spark this conversation, not just for one day every year. The theme for this year, of course, as Bruce mentioned, is choose to challenge. And that is an invitation to call out inequality where you see it. We can all play a role in this call out. It's time to reflect on the status of women globally, and that is where things take a really tragic turn for the worse. There's still millions of women and girls around the world who are struggling with violence, poverty, and a lack of education. And the fact that girls drop out of school when they hit puberty because there's no girls' toilets available on campus is pretty crazy in 2021. Or that the UN estimates that there are 12 million girls each year who are married before they turn 18. Equal pay pales into insignificance against stats like those, I think. I encourage you all to consider how you may be able to support the organisations that are very dedicated to improving conditions for our most poorest and oppressed women around the world. So that first call to action really is look outside your own house, look outside your own workplace, and see this bigger picture of women and how they are being oppressed in some of these terrible conditions around the world. Now, the first thing I'm going to ask you, and we're going to run a poll here, is one question, and you'll get some live results here. Very simple baseline question. Do you believe there is equality in your workplace? And hopefully you can see that poll. Do you believe there is gender equality in your workplace? I always like to see who I'm talking with. Now, for those that don't know about me or my work impacting gender equality, I'd like to give you a few words of introduction. So we've got a live result there of 75% yes and 25% no, and that's pretty good. It's pretty healthy. For those that don't know me about my work, I'm going to share a little bit about me. So I'm the founder and CEO of Inspiring Rare Birds, which is the organisation we're going to talk about today. And in simple terms, it's a for-profit, for-purpose enterprise that aims to improve women's economic security through equal opportunities as business owners and business leaders. We do this via a three-pronged approach of mentoring, of education and networking. And events like this, which we hold very regularly, are a combination of all of those three things. I've always encouraged men to be a part of this movement, and whether that's as a mentor, a board member, a speaker, ambassador, or just a supportive member of our community, because I truly believe that men need to be a part of this conversation for very real and very lasting change to ever occur. We have to do this together. So back in 2014, when I launched Rare Birds, there are very few role models for me as a female entrepreneur, nor had there ever been, to come to think of it, growing up at all. I can't remember any female entrepreneurial role models when I grew up or went to high school. So growing up, the idea of being a founder and running my own company never really ever occurred to me. But one day I met a man that actually changed everything for me. And he was a client that I'd flown to Melbourne to meet. His office was a big hive of activity and I felt instantly energized by him. And it was 2005. And I think he was day trading on the stock markets at the time. I think everyone was printing money in 2005. So he asked me to sit down anywhere I wanted to in his office. In a very, very cheeky and bold moment of exuberance, I walked around to his side of the desk and I sat in his chair and I said, I'm going to sit here one day anyway. Now, this guy laughed his head off and it could have gone either way. And that probably doesn't impress a lot of people. And in fact, the opposite might have happened to me as well. But this man, and in that moment, proved to be a huge turning point and a sliding doors moment for me. And he liked my confidence and the fact that I backed myself and was impressed with the level of my expertise. So needless to say, 6 weeks later, we started a company together and he became not only my business partner and my investor, but also my mentor. And he still mentors me today, which is now 16 years later. I actually had a long conversation with him yesterday on the phone. So the word of advice there is no matter where you are in life, seek out a mentor. They open doors and they open doors that you don't even know that exist, and they make you accountable for reaching the goals you set and always have your back. So this man and I built a very successful business together in a very short period of time. It's called Job Capital. It's a visa and migration services business, and I still run it to this day. The success of that was going from 0 to 40 million in revenue in just 5 years. And that was with a team of just 12 people. And we received a lot of attention and awards. And I was in the BRW stuff and Smart Company and was named Female Top Entrepreneur years in a row, won a Percy, all this stuff, all these awards and all these things were happening. I could say I was flying pretty high. However, all of those things, all those accolades, and being asked to speak at lots of events, I couldn't ever help but notice the lack of women in the room, because I was a technology-driven company. I was pretty much in the finance industry, and I'd go to these talks and there would be lots of guys looking at me when I was standing on a stage or in boardrooms. And it made me feel a little bit uncomfortable, to be honest. And it actually made me question a big question. And that was I there on my merit, or was I just waving this diversity flag? And this is really only, let's say 15 or 16 years ago. So lots changed in that short period of time. But I wanted to know where all the women entrepreneurs were. And so I decided to do a little bit of an experiment. And I contacted my old high school and asked if I could give a talk to the students about my success as an experience as an entrepreneur. So my old high school and primary school I actually went to. And I took a film crew with me. And I was really excited to be able to inspire them by sharing my story, by becoming a role model for these young women. A bit of the old local girl who never did much at school goes on to make millions type of thing, which is a bit naff, but that was the kind of vibe we were pushing. And I also filmed them taking their ideas about business and entrepreneurship. But my bubble really burst quickly that day. And when I began to talk about entrepreneurship, I was both disheartened and amazed by the fact that these schoolgirls didn't know much about it. I asked for a definition, and the girls who thought they had an answer told me that a business is run by a man. They thought an entrepreneur was a man. Now, these girls were all between the ages of 8 and 17. So it wasn't bad enough that I had this time giving thank you speeches and delivering keynote rooms chock full of guys, but to have it made so clear to me by a group of young girls that they had no idea, no concept at all, that entrepreneurship was open to them as a pathway and a successful and fulfilling life. And that really broke my heart. But it was also my aha moment. It was the moment I decided I needed to take action and have my head and my heart combine to take on a mission that was pretty big. And my mission there and then was to give every woman the opportunity to become an entrepreneur by choice. And I wanted to help women and girls imagine and create a different and inspiring future for themselves. I wanted them to be provided with role models. I wanted women to be illuminated in front of them, because as Bruce said, you can't be what you can't see. There's a reason that young men become firemen, and there's a reason that women become school teachers and nurses, because that's what they see growing up in their environment. So I knew that by creating role models, by having people like the wonderful women entrepreneurs that I knew being more visible, I knew I could make a difference. And that was sort of the first step I took. So that's sort of a self-choose to challenge. In more recent times, my focus has really shifted to include providing more female role models inside large organisations, and I think Bruce mentioned some of those companies, to inspire and encourage women who aspire to leadership positions. And for some of those industries, attracting women in the first place is very, very difficult. But for every industry, retaining high potential female talent and providing clear pathways to leadership seems sometimes near impossible. So what's going on? And this is where I'm going to feed you a little bit of data and a little bit in global insight. What can we do about it? And perhaps more importantly, why should we even bother? Why does it really affect me? Well, the economic case for diversity and inclusive businesses has been really super clear for years. And studies by McKinsey, such as the one they did in 2017, Delivering Through Diversity, show that companies with more diverse executive teams are 21% more likely than those without to have above average profitability. Now, these kind of stats have been around globally for a long time. America got onto this a long time ago. So if this is kind of a new thing to you, be careful you don't get left behind. Interestingly, the same research showed that Australian companies lead the way when it comes to women's share of executive roles, 21%. The share in the US is 19% and in the UK is 15%. So we are leading in this space in some ways. However, since chief executive women began doing an audit of female executives on the ASX 200 about 4 years ago, the numbers have been in very much decline. One of the key issues identified in the census was a lack of women in chief financial officer roles and line roles, which are positions responsible for profit and loss. It also found that 96% of CEO appointments were chosen from the CFO role. Unfortunately for women, they only represent 16% of CFOs and 12% of line roles. So you can see where the problem starts right there. There is a clear pathway issue. It seems that in order to climb to the top of the ladder in Australia, women are expected to do it without any of the steps, and that's not really fair or equitable, is it? In fact, over the last 2 years, there have been 50 CEO appointments in the ASX 200, and of those, only 3 women were selected, and one of those was from New Zealand, which means Australia could only find 2 women that believed they were good enough to be CEOs at the top companies in this country, and I think that is real travesty. So how do we get companies to be more profitable, increase GDP, and create more opportunities for women who want to fulfill their dream of landing that executive role and leading a great team? In my research on this issue, I came up upon a very interesting report that shed a lot of light onto where we're going wrong and what it takes mostly to make a difference, and how perception of difference between men and women can emerge as gender inequality. So the report was produced by Chief Executive Women and Bain and Company, and it's titled Better Together, Increasing Male Engagement in Gender Equality Efforts in Australia. And I'm very happy after this, perhaps Bruce, to send a link of that research from that report. Their main finding echoes that my idea that men must absolutely be a part of this conversation, and emphasis on that this must be made even more vital in large companies where leadership teams, i.e. the decision makers who can really affect change, are predominantly comprised of men. So the good news is that men aren't engaged in gender equality initiatives are in the minority, only 11%. However, the alarming discrepancy is that while 67% of men said they were satisfied with their level of engagement, 70% of women responded that they wished for greater engagement from the men in their company. And that, to me, is a very key stat of this speech today. Thinking about, how am I engaged as a guy? How do I want to be engaged as a female? And I mean, we're talking about binary sexes here, but there's a lot of fluidity in between and around that. But this is a stat, it's a clear indication of what's going on in our corporate world at the moment. And they're big questions that need to be asked of your own companies internally, not just at the top, not just in the D&I committee, across every level of your organisation. Male allyship is a topic that is a recent phenomenon in corporate Australia, and it's usually imported by the US-based multinational companies, where they have been promoting it for years as a way to improve its tech industry's diversity problem. On the 8th of this month, International Women's Day, we based our Rare Birds event around male allyship. I wanted to make an event that was completely inclusive of everybody, that celebrated the men in our world that have helped open those doors and helped us up those ladders. And we called it A Male Ally is Required to Interrupt Gender Bias. Now, we had over 450 people at that event, which shows me alone there is such a great interest in this topic and its ability to impact gender equality initiatives. So the bottom line really is, yes, of course, male allies are going to support women and work and call out discrimination and unconscious bias when they see it. And they're going to have a positive impact on equality right across that organisation. It's so important that through this behaviour, it has to be role modelled from the very top in order for it to have any buy-in at all from the lower levels of the organisation. And sometimes that's just not going to happen. To my astonishment, one of our panellists, the University of Sydney Professor Ray Cooper, said that she'd also conducted research on perceptions of gender equality in the workplace with similar results to those that I mentioned earlier. Roughly 70% of men interviewed didn't think there was a gender equality issue, where 70% of women thought there was. So there's a big gap there. There's a big conversation that has to happen in the middle of those two stats. But what really floored me, and this is, I think, this actually kept me awake that night, and not many things do, but what floored me is the people that we interviewed for those stats were aged between 16 and 40. We're not talking about the old guys in leadership with outdated values. These are the leaders of tomorrow. Now, to me, that is completely astonishing. Troy Roderick, who is a diversity and inclusion advisor, who is also part of our great panel discussion, made 3 very interesting points on leadership buy-in. And this is where you kind of get your pen out and take some notes on how-to tips and tricks. And the first one was that it's important to listen to the arguments against hiring and promoting more women into leadership. You have to ask these big questions. I think companies need to have robust discussions about why we're not doing it rather than why we should do it. To have active and constructive conversations and to help you understand the people who you're trying to convince. Now, that's something most great salespeople can do, but it's not an easy conversation for it. But we have to, for the better want of a term, lean into those big discussions and put them on the table and expect there will be 2 sides of the conversation going on, maybe 3. Second, he said it's important to look at what the company is trying to achieve in the market. Is it more customers? Is it new markets? Is it new products or services? And then pitch diversity and inclusion as a means to achieving those goals. There is plenty of data and evidence to show the benefits of diversity to a company's bottom line, of which we talked about earlier. Another point he made is to think about the fact that men have set up these systems and structures. So how can we help the leaders who influence change have the courage to change something they've long benefited from? So it's kind of like saying, well, you set the system up so it works for you and you've had great benefit from that. How do we actually change the system from the ground up or from the top down? And that takes a lot of thinking and a lot of work. And I think it takes a lot of entrepreneurial thinking as well to look outside the square. And he believes the answer lies not in relying on the moral part of gender equality to have effect, but also bringing in the conversation about the economic benefits. I mean, we're all here to make money. Every business wants to make money and have a healthy bottom line or healthy shareholders. So it has to have a link to the economic benefits of the business and then a link to their responsibility to deliver in that area. So when Rare Birds had all of our success in producing diverse and inclusive teams, and we've been providing companies with this great turnkey and fully automated and managed mentoring program, that's really designed to retain high potential female talent. And it enables business to practice diversity and inclusion in a real, measurable and unbiased way. We do everything from the outside of the business end to end and provide reports back into the business about how it looks from a diverse and inclusive perspective, real data in real time. It also provides an impartial and trusted guide for people who aren't able to express some of their concerns or have those big conversations or share their leadership goals openly at work. Maybe they're just not that confident. Maybe it's an environment that doesn't enable that easily. So mentees appreciate the freedom to speak openly and honestly, exposing their challenges and vulnerability to a high-level executive who sits outside of their business, outside of their industry, and isn't going to talk about it to anybody later. And not surprisingly, these companies are often from sectors that have enormous underrepresentation of women, such as mining, finance and engineering, and especially in technology and construction. And they're desperate to capitalise on the benefits of a diverse and inclusive workforce. And I'm really pleased to say we have case study after case study of organisations using that program and women going through that program who are now partners within the organisation, who have advanced their careers. They've used it as a way to attract more females to the business, to the workforce, and used it as a tool to retain that female talent, even if they go off and have children or are on maternity leave. So there's great benefits of having something in the organisation that is completely focused on diversity and inclusion for the pure purpose of attraction, retain talent and growth of that talent and promotion of it, of course. But something else interesting is happening here when we looked at the program and looked at what we're doing in diversity and inclusion. These people were also becoming entrepreneurs. They were being exposed through their mentoring to having a more entrepreneurial mindset because it was so free for them to talk and free to be creative about their thinking. And we know that being an entrepreneur like myself means that the way I run my business and the decisions I make are based on a mindset. Of course, I look at the data. I don't take big risks. Of course, I look at what's right and what's wrong, but a lot of it is based on intuition and a lot of it's based on gut feeling as well. And so let's talk about why that's good for business. In today's fast-paced digital age, and I know, Bruce, you probably have a lot of customers in that space, innovation and disruption are the new buzzwords, but people say that entrepreneurship and innovation go hand in hand. I reckon it does, and here's why. An entrepreneurial culture in business promotes 4 key actions: ask, try, do, and reflect. And I know this because I built a program with Professor at Sydney University Business School. We now run this program inside school curriculum for thousands of teenagers across Australia. We came down to working out that the entrepreneurial mindset is a base of those 4 prongs: ask, try, do, reflect. Ask, you must be curious. You must challenge the norms. You must collaborate, look outside your own experience. You must try things. You must test your ideas, learn from failures, be comfortable with the process of discovering new things. You must then do, and that's take action. This is one that's probably the most important to me. An innovative idea has absolutely no value until it has been taken to the market and judged worthwhile and needed by somebody else. And then reflect, what did you learn from the entire experience more broadly? What new skills have you got? What new knowledge has the business now developed as a result of this type of thinking? But this mindset also values broad and diverse opinions and experience. And this is where I'm going to weave it back into diversity and inclusion. We need to have broader mindsets and broader value bases to not keep doing the same things every International Women's Day and expecting different results, but having new conversations. And of course, that's why we talked about allyship. These sort of experiences and opinions, they love to be free of conventional wisdom and instead seek entirely new ways of thinking and doing. And I'm going to show you a 3-minute video, which going to seem a little bit out there, but it's a video that I show my team when we have any strategy session in the business. And it's just about thinking, what does 10% or 10 times mean to you? And there's a guy called Astro Teller, and he used to be Google's moonshot guru. You probably might have heard of him. And he describes it like this: when you try and make something 10% better, you use incremental thinking to make incremental improvements. And a lot of businesses are happy doing their 10% on year. But when your goal is to make something 10 times better, you need to think of an entirely new way of looking at it. So this is how I wanted to bring this concept of moonshot thinking 10 times better to how you're thinking about diversity and inclusion in your home and in your workplace. And we're going to show the video now.
The actual moonshot is wonderful, inspirational, poetic, beautiful, involved great technical challenges, genuine heroism. It brought the world together. But think about the Polynesian islander on the dugout canoe, deciding one day they were going to go that way. No one had ever been that way before. No one even knew if there was anything that way before. It was amazing, and it changed the world.
People can set their minds to magical, seemingly impossible ideas, and then through science and technology, bring them to reality. And that then sets other people on fire, that other things that look impossible might be accomplishable.
Galileo is such a hero, in thinking big, and What he represents to me is both curiosity and wonder that humanity had, that he had, that pushed him and drove himself to invent and work on the first telescopes that allowed us to see the moon, and here we are.
These aviation pioneers were figuring it out as they went. No one really knew how to build an airplane, right? No one knew how to fly an airplane. It was amazing and crazy and wonderful, and they wanted to explore.
Many years ago, the great British explorer George Mallory, who was to die on Mount Everest, was asked why did he want to climb it. He said, because it is there.
There's so many challenges in the world, and you can feel daunted by that, you know, and sort of oppressed by that, or you kind of say, how might we think differently about this?
Everyone else in the world is working on the next 10%. If you can be the one that delivers that 10 times improvement, you have a chance to really change things.
If you want cars to run at 50 miles per gallon, fine, you can retool your car a little bit. But if I tell you it has to run on a gallon of gas for 500 miles, you have to start over.
You need a lot of courage in this work, and you need a lot of persistence. One of the things that's really critical is not only having the courage to keep trying every day or thinking big, even if you don't really 100% believe it's possible, like you might think this might be possible, have the courage to try. That's how the greatest things have happened.
You don't spend your time being bothered that you can't teleport from here to Japan, because there's a part of you that thinks it's impossible. Moonshot thinking is choosing to be bothered by that.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Humanity's progress has been a series of amazing, audacious things, from the very small and personal up to the great, big, and grand. And we are a species of moonshots. And to me, that's like the really amazing, poetic, and inspirational thing.
I think our ambitions are a glass ceiling on what we can accomplish.
When you find your passion, you're unstoppable. You can make amazing things happen. It's been true through all of history.
I believe in the human spirit, and I believe that there are always going to be crazy people who will get out of bed one morning and say, you know what? I think I can build a space elevator. Grand Old School won't do it. But I think that if we become afraid to take these great big risks, we stop inspiring people. We stop achieving things. And the biggest nightmare scenario is that we won't have what it takes to solve the really big challenges.
When Kennedy said that we would put a man on the moon, it's about the fact that he said, we don't know how to do this yet. And
So I think we've cut the end of it off, but we will also send a link out to that. There's a particular line in that video that just puts the hairs on the back of my neck up every single time. And that is, we choose to be bothered. And that video is so motivating, but if we have to change something in its entirety to get to a different result, then perhaps that's what we need to do with diversity and inclusion as well. So can you imagine what impact would have on diversity and inclusion in business if people also adopted an entrepreneurial mindset to solving that problem? So here's a little story I want you to think about. Women and minorities have often been described as a boys' club, right? Businesses as a boys' club, where the key to the boardroom and the way up the corporate ladder is hidden from everyone else. An entrepreneur asks a different question. That is, why is there a key? Why is there a door? Why are the offices in buildings full of lots of little rooms? Where hierarchy is indicated by how many people you share your room with, and what would happen if? And that's what I would like to see more of. So if we keep taking these traditional routes with diversity and inclusion, I think it's going to be another 100 years before we even get there. If we can take an entrepreneurial mindset and change things and choose to challenge and choose to be bothered, I think we're going to get a different result. Some of the things that I've thought of, which I want to share from an article I wrote on International Women's Day, was this: flexible roles for everyone, so both men and women feel supported to play an important part in their children's early development without losing out on opportunities at work. Now, I know for a fact there's a huge leaky pipe in corporate Australia when women go and have babies, but we need to have equality. We need to enable men to spend time with their babies as well as women spend time with their babies, and have no stigmatism for men around that. Blind recruitment, which is a really interesting one, where the names are not included in applications, and when hires are made purely on merit, the gender balance is definitely going to change pretty quickly. And I think it was the London Philharmonic that hide an entire orchestra by not being able to see the player of the instrument, and they got a gender balance in the orchestra. And then, of course, accountability, set targets and measure results, and make diversity and inclusion something leadership teams are responsible as part of their KPIs. Make sure women are not the first to volunteer at work, cleaning up, buying the birthday cake, buying the Christmas present, buying the birthday present, organising the work function. Everyone has a role to play definitely when it's a communal type event. Be conscious of the language we use, and women taking care also not to be biased. And I find this description of male, pale, male and stale really deeply offensive. I am as offended by that for men as when I hear a strong female leader being called aggressive. I know so many fine men who fit that description in appearance, who are great, conscious, long-term supporters of diversity and inclusion, and are amazing mentors in our Rare Birds community of mentees. And I applaud male allyship and enable the space for guys to give them and let them feel and know how important that role is for me in my business and in the businesses we work with. And then I'm sure a lot of you have girls and daughters and granddaughters. So picture a world where you want your own daughter and your granddaughter to live and work in, and every single day make the subtle and conscious changes to enable that, firstly at home, then it might be in the schoolyard, it might be then in further education, and then at work level. But you have an individual responsibility as a mum or a dad to be involved in that progress. Finally, let's end single sex events and talks. And I was once asked many years ago, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, to speak at a large accounting firm, it's a global firm, about gender equality. And when I looked out across the room after I'd arrived and everyone sat down, the room was completely full of women. And I chose to challenge. And the first thing I said when I stood at the microphone was, where are all the men? I stopped the event, and they actually went and got some guys from their desk to attend the event. And all I said was, everybody in this business is worthy at a seat at the table on International Women's Day. Now, I'm sure I've given you a lot to think about today, lots of juicy data, lots of take-home to-dos, a bit of inspiration, I hope. But my greatest hope is that you will embrace this year's theme of Choose to Challenge, that you will be alert, you'll be aware, you'll be daring, and you'll do things very differently, even if that means pulling them apart and starting again. Don't keep doing the things that aren't working. Think outside the box, and if you can't imagine, there is no box. So please jump onto the Rare Birds website and sign up for our newsletter for lots more content like this, or information about our mentoring program, but become a part of our community. Everybody is welcome. Men and women are equally welcome to our community. We can change, but we have to do this together. So my last question to you is not who's with me, you're mad if you're not with me. Thank you so much. And I think we're going to open to some questions, Bruce.
We will. So obviously with this webinar format, we can't see everyone, the participants. So if you've got a question, can you please type it into the Q&A, and we'll go through and I'll ask Jo the questions on the way through. But thanks, Jo, that was fantastic. I love the video. It's interesting, we're just in the middle of a 5-year strategic planning process, and we spent this morning actually looking at what's the moonshot for BlueRock and where can we go, how far can we go, and what does our business look like in not just 5 years, but 10 and 20 years time, where we want to go.
Yeah. I mean, every time we show that video at a strategy session, there's just these new ideas that float, and we allow the space for those new ideas. So nobody's judged for putting something on the table and it might sound completely ridiculous, but there has to be these wonderful open forums where you have this complete diverse thinking going on and enable a safe place for that to be channeled. And there's nuggets of gold that come out of that all the time.
And also one of the quotes that I wrote down out of it was, have the courage to try, that one of the ladies said in the video. And that entrepreneurial mindset is core to us at BlueRock. Is we describe ourselves as an entrepreneurial advisory firm, so doing things differently is part of us. But so just in terms of what we're going to do afterwards while the questions are coming through is the report. Yeah, so we'll send the link around to the video. We'll send a link around to the report that you mentioned, where the Bain report. So it's interesting, the 70% of women that want people to be more involved. Yeah, what does that look like in terms of is it the visibility of that, or how does that work? How do you see that in practice?
Engagement. It's about, people sometimes feel they're engaged, but there's others that think that they don't feel like they're being engaged with. So there's a conversation, I think, that has to happen inside the business to ask that particular question, and then ask the second question is, why don't you feel that way? Or why do you feel like you are engaged? Or why do you feel you're not being engaged with? And get to the real grassroots and it's gritty, this stuff, sometimes they're not always pretty conversations, but they're conversations, Bruce, that are not they're not for the selected few. It's not just for the leadership. It's not just for the D&I committee. These are the questions that should be asked at every level of the organisation to gauge, you might have someone who's recently joined an organisation that you run, who's your next emerging talent, who's your next aspiring CEO. So asking those questions very early on and getting that table right early on, I think is critical, because otherwise it's just got kind of too late. It's people trying to push down from the top too hard, and it's quite suppressing for people as well when they get forced things.
I've got a question that's come through, and we do quite a bit of work with a group called Performance by Design, and where there's they talk about real talk and open and honest, setting your trademark values and behaviors and being able to have open and honest conversations. And these difficult conversations talk about, Jeanette's asked the question, how do you encourage businesses to create a safe space for these difficult conversations?
Yes. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for your question. And I can share by experience, because that's what I like to do and how I do it in my own space. Now, Jo Burston at work is the same as Jo Burston at when she's at home. There's no change in my personality. I don't change uniforms and become someone else or something else. And I believe that level of authentic leadership is required to have those open conversations. I have to be prepared to enable the space whereby if somebody constructively criticizes my leadership or something I've done, that I'm open-hearted, authentic, and intelligent enough to take on what they're saying and accept it, process it, and then respond to it. So if I can show that or demonstrate that as a leader in my business, then there's going to obviously be a propensity for other people within the organisation to feel it's safe to do the same thing and not get into trouble for speaking their authentic truth. I think being candid in business is really important at the moment, using less words to get to the point. And I think one place I've seen that in particular is when people had to work remotely, they had to say the same things with fewer words online. And I saw conversations become more and more candid as a result of that. But what did happen in the process is that people started to feel more confident about being their authentic own truth and their own voice. And I think part of that was because they're sitting in the comfort of their own home. They often weren't made up. They didn't always have them full of head of makeup on, or they had their dog in the background, or you could see that something might have been a bit untidy behind their desk. So it started to humanize people a little bit more and to make them feel a little bit more authentic and more engaged from that perspective. So my wrap on that is, be your authentic self. The leader has to show vulnerability. The leader has to be prepared to hear the conversations that they're also dishing out.
Yeah, that's right. I'm just reading a book by Ray Dalio on principles. I'm not sure if you've read that, but it talks about radical open-mindedness and being
radical.
open. Yeah, no, it's great.
I love it. I'm a straight shooter, so I like being told straight down the line what's going on. If I'm not doing it right, just tell me.
Yeah. Another question from Joe Stanlake is, you said that the system is often built by men for men, and most of the barriers are invisible. There's no one says we're not going to promote women, but somehow it happens. How do you uncover the barriers in a company?
Thanks, Jo, for the question. I think uncovering the barriers starts again with these conversations, and we have to look at the perception of every single individual in the organisation, not just the perception of people at an executive level or an HRD level that are changing and moving policies. The conversation and negotiation of the changes in the workplace have to be at all levels. And I think one of the speakers that we had from SBS, Josh, he talked about the democratization of those policies. And rather than the leaders pushing these invisible changes, it was a collective of the entire company based on a culture of standardizing D&I for the organisation and mandating D&I for the organisation, so that when changes had to be made, they were done in a democratic way that included everyone. And it was more of a framework where you were part of D&I, and it was odd for you not to be a part of it, not the other way around. So I think seeing those old systems and identifying the changes, I think it has to be just done collectively. It's a long process, and these things don't happen very quickly. It can't, they take years to actually affect change, but the organisations that do invest in that are seeing results. And like I said before, it's an economic result that's speaking volumes for them.
Bedri's asked a question that's a similar thing. So how do you set a platform in an organisation for diversity? And I think it's probably a similar answer, isn't it?
Very similar answer. I know lots of organisations, some that we work with, that have committees, which tend to be, they're very well run, by the way, so there's no criticism there. They're doing something which is great, but it tends to be on top of the workload or the job that they already have. So I think if you spread that a little bit thinner and have more people involved across all layers of the organisation, from all diverse backgrounds and cultures, ages, etc., gender, then having a larger pool of people that are committed to this change I think that's a standing platform, a great platform to start with. So usually these organisations will have, maybe there's 4 or 5 people in the committee. Well, why not make it 30 people in the committee and separate and divide the tasks in a more democratic way to include more people that are making the big decisions about diversity and inclusion from a more diverse pool, which has greater perspective as well. But like I said, this is hard work. It doesn't happen quickly. And it really takes a lot of thought, and it takes a lot of groundwork to get it going. But where I have seen larger committees or larger groups of people involved, change seems to happen quicker.
Okay. Changing tack a little bit now, Juliet's asked a question around boosting female founders and initiatives and the criteria for funding female founders. And so the operation of grants, companies with female founders to continue to remain majority owned by females. What do you think about funding female founders and how to work through that?
Right. Well, I've got strong opinions about this, as you'd imagine, Bruce. We know that only 2% of VC investment goes into female founded companies, and that's not just in Australia, that's also in the US, which is phenomenally disgusting, right? It's just not going to happen. I did a talk years ago on a TED talk on a flight to San Francisco, and the title of my talk was "There's a lot of money to be made taking women entrepreneurs seriously." And I talked about particularly investing. Now, where I think, and I'm going to share this from an observation perspective because I haven't done the research, but I see that a lot of women get to business and they sort of cap out or ceiling out at about $500,000 in turnover. So the business can start pretty good. They start to hit ceilings there because it's a big change between a startup and that next level of building a framework, maybe a board, processes, policies. So they cap out at about 500,000 when they get a little bit outside of their depth and there's too many hats spinning. The female founder grant is based on businesses that are turning over more than 1.5. So I would actually like to see that decreased and lowered so that there's more women in that pool where they're hitting that ceiling to have access to those dollars. And I mean, 1.5 is still, it's still a micro business, but a lot of these businesses are also being started at home, and they're being started by women who perhaps already have full-time employment or part-time employment. So they get to this stage where they can't sort of grow any further without funding. They run out of cash, or they end up with cash flow issues. They haven't quite got all the expertise that they need around them yet because they can't afford it. So, and I think that amount needs to be lowered. I'd also like to see, I'd like to see it lower than that again, but have a different framework around who qualifies and how you qualify. The fact that the government is giving money is good. And obviously I'm a client of the federal government, so I'm going to be very careful about what I say here. But secondly to that, there's during COVID, there was more female businesses folded, and more females lost their jobs as employees, particularly because of the type of work and the type of businesses they had. So I still think we need to have a focus on resurrecting those kind of businesses with funding, with government funding, and not, we need money in construction and all the areas that we know are job creative, but also let's go back to those areas that have failed through COVID. So I think my advice is on funding. I know Female Founders is a great program. I built my business on its own cash flow. I learned how to read a balance sheet very, very easily and very early. I was fastidious with counting my coins in the business, and I made sure that from day one, it ran on its own cash flow. I was very lucky to be able to do that with my business model. And I never took a loan out ever or had investment other than the first round I got from my mentor.
It's definitely challenging. That's an interesting fact. I understood that women lost employment at higher rates, but I didn't realize that women businesses had also struggled as well, which is, it's difficult to see.
Because they're retailers and they're hospitality industry, type organisation. So first affected type industries.
Yeah, we work with a lot of those sort of industries. So sort of turning it back to within organisations now for a sec. So Inbal's asked a question as to what you say to women who don't want to speak up in the workplace because they don't want to be seen to be getting special treatment, or they don't want to be complaining, and it's sort of a cop out to working hard and things like that. What advice have you got for them?
I think that if you see it as a cop out, or it's something negative, then the business culture must be pretty toxic to start with for you not to being able to have a safe place to do that. I think the louder that we are and the stronger that we are, the more people will follow, not the reverse, and go looking for those male allies in the business, those guys that can help you strengthen your voice and walk beside you when you do have something to say. And that's why we talked about male allyship in such depth on Monday, because it worked throughout my entire career where, I was mansplained a few times, don't worry, in the boardroom, but I also had a CFO that was a very seasoned guy in business. And to give you one example, I remember we walked into a meeting with a potential customer in my boardroom, and they were talking about golf and football, which I have absolutely zero interest in, but I know a lot of women do. And the guy addressed the first question to my CEO, thinking it was he was the CEO. And how my CFO combated that was extraordinary. He turned around and said to this guy, well, Jo's the CEO of the business, so perhaps she's better positioned to answer that question. And that's complete male allyship in action right there. He chose to challenge. So find that guy in your business that can walk beside you and help strengthen your voice and have your support when you need it.
Yeah, it's a similar question here from Kylie, but how do you keep hanging in there when you fight for diversity and inclusion, but the leadership team don't see it as an issue or underestimates how much it matters in talent attraction and retention?
Look, I've had lots of conversations over the years with companies that just don't get it at all and can't see the economic value and can't see the cultural value of it and can't see the innovative value of it. And, my question would be, is that the right place for you? Is that the right home for you?
Yeah.
Is it aligned to my values or not?
Yeah. Question from Kane. So in the recruitment side of things, so when attempting to correct gender imbalances, is it preferable to screen out male candidates or screen blindly? I know you talk about blindly, but
I like the idea of screening blindly because it takes away a lot of unconscious bias that is inbuilt into every single one of us. So it might not just be a gender bias, it could be an age bias, or it could be a cultural background bias because someone's name is spelled in Chinese as well as it is in Australian on the CV, or it could be because that they're 65 but they have all the skills. So I think we have to remove all of the bias, and to do that it's really hard for humans because they're generally let's say we've got these triggers that we've inherently grown inside of us from our own environments growing up. It could be from your household values, or where you went to school, or we worked first. So the more of these that we can remove physically and intentionally with conscious purpose, the more likely we're going to be able to see a result that reflects it. I wouldn't remove men from the process because that's also biased. That's sexist.
Yeah. Probably on a similar recruitment theme, another question that came through. So what do you say when you hear, we want more women in leadership, but they're hard to find? There are not many in our field. They don't want to apply for the job. They're unlikely to leave their current roles. How would you respond to those sorts of narratives?
More excuses. How many more excuses can you find? Because they are there. They do want to. You can find them. There's great headhunters out there. Like they're there. You have to make the concerted effort to go and look for them. Now, I remember years ago, when I started Rare Birds especially, I had a lot of people coming to me that wanted females in technology in particular, because there was just such a shortage. And the truth was, I knew a lot of those women, and I would approach them and say, are you interested in a discussion? Or someone's approached me about a particular role. It's a global role or it's an Australian role. And it's not just about skills, it's about what does that company bring to me as a female in a marginal profession, and they'll scrutinize the business. They'll look at what is that organization doing for women? How are they managing diversity and inclusivity? How are they looking at equality? What programs are they running for those women? So it's not just about let's find the person wherever they are, and that's the hard part. The hard part is actually retaining them once you get them there.
Yeah.
And making leadership pathways that are very clearly visible for the women in that organization. And we worked with a company recently that's been doing this to move women into partnership in the organization, and we've had success with it through the mentoring program in particular, because the participants are feeling like there's an investment in them beyond a sponsorship in the organization or someone just holding their hand during their career. There's this combination of sponsorship and then mentorship and then leadership programs, and realizing, acknowledging when that emerging talent comes to your business and you want to retain them, have the conversation really early about their childbearing plans. Don't wait till they've announced that they're going to go on maternity leave to work out what you're going to do with them. Have it when they're young and they've just come into the business.
It's a tricky question. Yeah.
Tricky, but if you've got a super talent in your business and you can see the potential of that person and you're investing in that person over a period of time, then having that conversation in the right way, of course, in the right manner, is going to be a relief for them to know that you care about them perhaps having children at some point and what that's going to look like for their own career. That's one of the biggest leaky pipes, Bruce. That's where people leave and don't come back.
Oh, for sure. It's right on 1 o'clock. There's one more question I want to ask. There's a few others from some of the BlueRock team, which I might just get Jo to answer, that we can do after the end of the webinar. But just in terms of one is from Christy about how to best connect with visionary women that are pursuing that 10 times entrepreneurial ventures, mentors men and women who have had the challenges. In Australia, particularly in the tech industry, that's not always that easy. What's your advice there?
Look, go to the Rare Birds community. We're over 60,000 men and women now. There is every single industry that you could ever think of. There's about 40% of men who are mentors in the programs. So there's a lot of connection that can be done. All of our events are pretty much free. There's only a couple that aren't every year. So you have the opportunity to meet, engage with other people within the community at your own free will. So you're most welcome to join there. And again, I mean, I belong to a lot of things. So I don't think there's one place for everything. And there's lots of women's networks and organisations. I think the more the better. The other one I like is Chief Executive Women as well. I think they're an amazing organisation, do some pretty incredible work. And I know in each state there's organisations that focus on technology. I think I'm doing a talk later on the year for women in tech for Victoria. So I'm sure that there's a women in tech in New South Wales or whatever state you're in. So hunt them out, Google it. It only takes a few seconds to find this stuff these days on Google. And then don't just join one, join as many as you need to.
I'm going to wrap it up because it's just after. Jeanette, Inbal, Nikita, Brooke, and Sandra, thank you for your questions. I'll put them to Jo and we'll get some responses. But the theme for all of them is, supporting, thank you for you, and thank you for all the insights that you've shared with us today. There's lots of questions around how the challenges you faced and how would you advise the younger you going through your career, if you were that 17-year-old girl and the school that you talked about at your old high school, and what advice you get. But unfortunately, we can't get to all of those questions today. But thank you so much, Jo, for spending some time with us today. I look forward to getting the applications for the mentorship for one lucky participant today. So we'll send the email around so you can fill in the questionnaire and we can judge that. So you get some time with the Rare Birds team as part of that mentorship program. But thank you very much for everyone for taking the time to celebrate International Women's Day today and spending some time and listening to Jo. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for having me, Bruce. Really lovely to do this with you today.
Thanks a lot. See you guys.